The static on the radio crackled, spitting out a fragmented weather report. Category 3, Rapid Intensification. Keys under mandatory evacuation. Aris Thorne barely registered the words. Her gaze was fixed on the underwater feed displayed on the monitor. The vibrant coral, usually teeming with life, now skeletal white bleaching. It was happening faster than predicted. A ghostly erosion of the reef she dedicated the last decade to studying. Outside the small research station, City A, converted Coast Guard outpost perched on the edge of Marathon Key City. The wind was picking up, palm trees whipping into a frenzy. The sky, a bruised purple, pressed down on the ocean. Hurricane Lysander was coming, and it was hungry, Aris. You really need to think about getting out, Ben, the station's caretaker and the closest thing she had to a friend here, called from the doorway, securing another shutter over the large windows. He was a man built like a weathered dock piling, all muscle and quiet strength. The surge is going to be bad, they're saying record levels. Just finishing up a data download. Ben, then I'll head to the shelter. She tapped a few commands, archiving the grim data. Each bleached coral head was a tiny failure, a visible consequence of a warming world. Ben didn't argue, he knew Aris. Logic rarely swayed her when it came to her research. But the tightening in his jaw betrayed his worry. Be quick then, and take the truck. Don't risk the jeep in this. She nodded, dismissing a prickle of unease. The unease wasn't about the hurricane, it was a low, thrumming sense of something foreign wrong that had been building all week, something beyond the environmental crisis. The first real surge hit with a roar. Salt spray hammered the station, blurring the windows. Aris grabbed her waterproof bag and headed for the door, just as Ben shouted, "Look," he was pointing towards the beach. A dark shape, monstrous and rectangular, had been tossed onto the sand like a child's abandoned toy. A shipping container, but not just Tuankini shipping container. The beach was already littered with debris, splintered wood, plastic coolers. A tangle of fishing nets of the usual casualties of a storm's initial assault. Most of the locals were already focused solely on securing their properties, boarding windows, hauling boats further inland. They wouldn't notice the container. Not yet. Aris found herself walking towards it, compelled by a force she couldn't explain. The wind tore at her rain gear, the sand stinging her exposed skin. It was bigger than any container she'd ever seen, and differently constructed. The steel was thicker, the seams reinforced with heavy-duty welding, and the markings, standard shipping containers, were plastered with identifying numbers, flags and hazard symbols. This one had those, but beneath them, etched into the steel, were symbols Aris didn't recognize. Geometric patterns overlaid with what looked like ancient runes. They weren't recent. The weathering suggested they'd been there for decades, perhaps even longer. "Ben, come look at this," she called, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. He joined her cautiously, scanning the swirling gray sky. "Looks like a container, Aris. A big one. Probably lost its moorings. Not like any container I've seen. And look at these markings." She ran a gloved hand over the strange symbols. "They're old and deliberate. This isn't just about the storm." Ben shrugged, skeptical. "People do strange things with shipping containers. Could be anything." She knew he was right, logically. But her gut churned with a premonition she couldn't ignore. She walked around the container, searching for a door, some indication of what lay inside. It was seamless, almost monolithic. Whoever built this thing didn't want it opened. After a fruitless search, she discovered something on the far side, almost hidden by the sand and the storm's debris. A small, square patch, meticulously welded onto the steel. She scraped away the sand and saw it, a reinforced hatch sealed with multiple locking mechanisms. "This isn't standard," she said, her voice tight. "This is secure." Ben found a crowbar in the back of his truck and began working on the hatch. The metal screamed in protest as he forced the bars into the gaps, but the hatch held. It was designed to withstand far more than a crowbar, he cursed, switching to a small sledgehammer. Each blow echoed against the roar of the storm. After a brutal 10 minutes, the locking mechanism finally gave way with a resounding clang. Ben wrestled the hatch open, revealing a dim interior. The air that rushed out smelled stale, metallic, and vaguely sweet. "Be careful," he warned. shining a flashlight into the darkness. Aris ignored him, already reaching inside. It wasn't filled with the expected cargo. Electronics, clothing, manufactured goods. It was almost completely empty. Just bare steel walls and a thick, rubberized floor. Then she saw it, taped to the inner side of the hatch. Carefully waterproofed was a small, rectangular package. Brown paper bound with twine, slick with moisture. She carefully peeled it free, her hands trembling. Inside, nestled in a bed of what felt like dried seaweed, were two objects. The first was a compass, antique heavy brass, intricately engraved with a needle that spun wildly, refusing to settle on north. Not a modern navigational tool, but a mariner's compass, perhaps a century old. It felt cold to the touch, radiating an unnatural chill. The second was a tightly rolled piece of parchment, yellowed with age. Aris carefully unfurled it, revealing a series of symbols, not the same runes as on the container, but equally unfamiliar. A code complex, layered, and undeniably intentional. She didn't recognize the cipher, but a primal instinct told her that unraveling it was the key to understanding why this secret had washed up on the shores of the Florida Keys. Just as a hurricane descended, the wind howled, the rain intensified. Ben stared at her, his face etched with concern. "Aris, we need to go now." But Aris didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the compass, on the coded message, a growing dread twisting in her stomach. Before she could speak, a second, larger wave slammed into the beach, surging over the container and directly towards them, carrying with it something large, dark, and undeniably faint-wine moving. The station was a wreck, not structurally. Ben had seen to that, but internally it felt violated. The storm had passed, leaving a swath of destruction across the Keys, but the image of the container, the archaic symbols, and the strange contents burned brighter in Aris' mind than any damage the hurricane had wrought. Ben had begrudgingly agreed to let her stay an extra day, insisting she call in her findings to the Coast Guard. She de-promised, but her focus remained laser, locked on the puzzle in her hands. The coded message lay spread across the station. Small lab table, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent light. Hours had bled into each other, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a frantic energy. She tried every standard cipher 30 substitution, transposition, even Vigantoirsai, but nothing yielded coherent results. The symbols weren't T letters. They were more akin to pictographs, stylized representations of what she could yet determine. She started with the historical charts, poring over maritime records for the Keys. The islands had a rich, if shady, past, piracy, rum running, drug smuggling, tooey. They all left their mark on the region's history. And then she found a reference, buried in a digitized archive of 18th century naval logs, a mention of the Serpent spine, a legendary, undocumented route used by pirates to navigate the shallow waters and evade detection. The description resonated, a treacherous network of hidden channels, coral reefs, and mangrove tunnels. And within that description, a location, Devil's Elbow, a secluded cove on the remote western side of Islamorada, a place locals whispered about, a place supposedly cursed. The connection felt tenuous, but it was the first thread she found. She shifted her attention to the container markings, meticulously documenting each symbol and cross, referencing them with databases of historical cartels. A flicker of recognition, the symbols weren't T-pirate markings. Not exactly, but they bore a striking resemblance to those used by the Sombra Negra cartel, a notorious Colombian organization that had used the Keys as a transshipment point in the late 1980s. They vanished abruptly, investigated but never fully dismantled. The information felt disjointed, fragmented, pirates, cartels, a hidden cove. It didn't add up. It felt like pieces of a puzzle from different boxes. "Find something," Ben asked, appearing in the doorway with a plate of sandwiches. His expression was a mix of concern and impatience. "Maybe," Aris replied, gesturing towards the table. "I think this container, it is connected to something old, something hidden. And it might not be what the Coast Guard is expecting," Ben frowned. "You still haven't called them?" "Not yet." She needed more. You are playing a dangerous game, Aris. Let the authorities handle it. I wish I could, Ben. But something about this feels wrong. It feels like they shouldn't already handle it. He sighed, placing the sandwiches on the table. Just be careful, okay? And call them, please. She nodded, barely registering his words. She needed to talk to someone who knew the keys, someone who remembered the old stories, someone like Old Man Hemmings. Hemmings lived in a ramshackle cabin on the outskirts of Isla Mirada, a veritable hoarder surrounded by a lifetime of salvaged treasures and forgotten memories. He spent his entire life fishing these waters, and he knew the keys like the back of his hand. She found him tinkering with a lobster trap, his face a road map of wrinkles etched by years of sun and salt. She showed him the photographs of the container markings. He stared at them for a long moment, his eyes clouding over. "Where do you see these?" he asked, his voice raspy. "On a container that washed ashore during the storm," Aris replied, choosing her words carefully. Hemmings spat a stream of tobacco juice into the sand. "That ain't tea good. That ain't tea good at all. You recognize them?" He nodded slowly. "Seen him before. Long time ago, back in the darker days, sombra negra, dirty business. You know what they were using the keys for? Moving things. Things that shouldn't be moved through the back channels. Devil's Elbow was one of their favorite spots, hard to reach, easy to disappear." "Devil's Elbow?" Aris asked, a chill running down her spine. "Don't go messing around out there, girl. Bad things happen there. Still do, probably. Leave it alone, let sleeping dogs lie." "But what was in the container?" Hemming shook his head. "Don't you know? Don't you want to know? Just stay away for your own good." He refused to say more, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. His warning echoed in her ears as she drove back to the station. Aris returned to the lab, the compass still weighing heavily in her hand. She placed it on the table, rotating it slowly. The needle spun erratically, refusing to align with magnetic north. She held it steady, watching as it danced and flickered, finally settling. It consistently pointed west, not towards true north, not towards magnetic north, but directly towards Devil's Elbow, regardless of where she moved the compass within the station. It stubbornly maintained its course. It was as if the compass wasn't responding to the Earth's magnetic field, but to something else entirely. Something hidden within the cove. She grabbed a detailed chart of the keys, marking Devil's Elbow. It was a small, almost inaccessible inlet, surrounded by treacherous reefs and dense mangroves, perfect for concealment, perfect for secrets. She knew she should heed Hemmings' warning. She knew she should call the Coast Guard, but the pull was too strong. She had to know what was hidden in Devil's Elbow. As she left Hemmings' shack, a battered pickup truck lingered a little too long on the dirt road behind her. She caught a glimpse of the driver towing a man with a shadowed face, hidden behind tinted glass. She didn't recognize the vehicle, but the feeling of being watched settled over her like a shroud. She dismissed it as paranoia, a consequence of the mounting tension. But as she drove, she repeatedly checked her rearview mirror. The truck remained a consistent distance behind her, a silent, watchful presence. It wasn't simply following. It was Finty pacing her, deliberately maintaining the space, sending a clear, unsettling message. She wasn't imagining it. Someone knew she'd been to see Hemmings. Someone was interested in what she was learning, and they were letting her know they were watching. The drive to Devil's Elbow felt longer than it should have. Each winding mile along the overseas highway ratcheted up the tension. The pickup truck was still there, a phantom tailing her, maintaining a careful distance. She tried to lose it, taking unexpected turns, speeding up, slowing down. But it always reappeared, a persistent shadow in her periphery. She finally ditched it near a deserted boat ramp, switching to her smaller, more agile SUV, hoping to navigate the treacherous coastal track. Devil's Elbow lived up to its name. The approach was a narrow, overgrown path that twisted through dense mangrove forests. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the canopy, casting the area in a perpetual twilight. The air hung heavy and humid, thick with the smell of decaying vegetation and salt water. Despite the recent hurricane, the cove itself was eerily calm, the water a glassy black, it felt. Wrong, too quiet, too still. Hemmings' words echoed in her mind. Bad things happen there. Still do, probably. She parked the SUV, grabbing her waterproof backpack and a handheld scanner. The scanner registered a faint electromagnetic signature emanating from within the mangroves. Something electronic, something hidden. Following the signal, she pushed through a wall of tangled roots and vines, discovering a narrow opening concealed behind a curtain of hanging foliage. It was artificial, carefully hidden, almost seamlessly blended into the natural environment. A concealed entrance. She squeezed through the opening, finding herself in a small concrete clearing. Before her stood a dilapidated building, half swallowed by the encroaching jungle. The structure was rectangular, prefabricated, and clearly not original to the island. It had once been painted a drab olive green, but years of exposure had faded the color to a ghostly gray. The windows were boarded up, the door reinforced with steel plating. It looked abandoned, derelict, but a closer inspection revealed signs of recent activity. Fresh tire tracks in the muddy ground, discarded food wrappers, a cigarette butt crushed beneath a torn tarp. She cautiously approached the door, pressing her ear against the cold metal. Silence. She tried the handle, locked. After a moment's hesitation, she used a small, portable breaching tool from her backpack. The lock clicked open with a surprisingly quiet snap. She pushed the door open, her hand hovering near the small pistol she carried, a precaution Ben had insisted upon. The interior was dark and damp, smelling of mildew and diesel fuel. She activated her headlamp, sweeping the beam across the room. It was a single large space divided into several makeshift compartments. The furniture was sparse and utilitarian, fitting metal desks, folding chairs, bunk beds, but it was the equipment that caught her attention. A bank of sophisticated communication consoles lined one wall, covered in dust but undeniably functional. High-frequency radios, satellite phones, encrypted modems. This wasn't a pirate hideout, it was a modern operation. A command center. She moved deeper into the facility, exploring the various compartments. In one, she found a small workshop filled with tools and electronic components. In another, empty crates labeled with a faded shipping company logo. And then she found the manifest. It lay crumpled in a wastebasket. A single sheet of waterproof paper covered in typed text. The manifest listed a series of shipments, agricultural products destined for various ports throughout the Caribbean. Dates, quantities, vessel names. But the vessel names were untraceable, registered to shell corporations in Panama and the British Virgin Islands. Agricultural products, she muttered, examining the list. Right, the quantities were enormous. Far too large to be legitimate agricultural shipments. This wasn't about bananas or pineapples. It was about something far more valuable and far more dangerous. She found a small storage room tucked away in the back of the facility. Inside, stacked neatly on pallets, were empty shipping containers, identical to the one that had washed ashore, and each one bore the same archaic markings. The Sombra Negra symbols. The pieces were starting to fall into place. The pirates, the cartel, the hidden cove. It wasn't a relic of the past, it was a continuation. The Sombra Negra hadn't vanished. They'd simply adapted. They'd gone underground. Using Devil's Elbow as a secure transfer point, exploiting the remote location and the complex network of waterways to move their illicit cargo. She ran a hand through her hair, feeling a surge of adrenaline. This was bigger than she'd imagined. This wasn't just a local smuggling operation. It was a major international criminal network, and she'd stumbled right into the middle of it. A sudden noise startled her, a metallic scrape from the far end of the facility. She instinctively dropped to a crouch, raising her pistol. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. Silence. She moved slowly, cautiously towards the sound. The beam of her headlamp danced across the walls, revealing nothing but shadow and dust. The air was thick with anticipation. She reached the end of the corridor and peered around the corner, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was empty, or so it seemed. Then a figure emerged from the darkness, stepping out of the shadows, tall, lean, dressed in dark clothing, a pistol glinting in their hand. The figure raised the weapon, aiming directly at her. "You shouldn't be here." A voice rasped, cold and devoid of emotion. The gun was cold steel pressed against her temple. Aris didn't flinch. Years of field work, of facing down unpredictable forces of nature, had instilled a certain stoicism. But this wasn't nature. This was deliberate, calculated malice. "Drop the weapon," the man commanded. his voice roughened by years of shouting over engines and harsh weather. Aris slowly lowered her pistol, letting it clatter to the concrete floor. He moved with surprising speed, disarming her completely and securing her hands behind her back with heavy-duty zip ties. He was older than she'd initially thought, somewhere in his 50s. With a face etched with lines of hardness and cynicism, his eyes were dark and assessing, devoid of any warmth. "Who are you?" he demanded, his accent thick with Colombian Spanish. "And what are you doing here?" "My name is Aris Thorne. I'm a marine biologist. I was studying the effects of the hurricane on the coral reefs." A pathetic explanation, she knew, but it was the truth as far as it went. He snorted. "A marine biologist in Devil's Elbow. Don't insult my intelligence." He gestured to one of the men who had silently materialized behind her. "Search her." Rough hands patted her down, rifling through her pockets, emptying the contents of her backpack. They found her scanner, her camera, the compass, and the coded message. Vargas snatched the message from the searcher, his eyes narrowing as he examined the strange symbols. "What is this?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "Just some old charts, historical research," Aris lied, keeping her voice steady. He didn't believe her. "You've been talking to Hemmings." It wasn't a question. She said nothing. He backhanded her across the face, the force of the blow sending her reeling. "Answer me." I asked him about the history of the area." She stammered, her cheek burning. "And what did he tell you?" "Nothing important." "Don't play games with me, Thigh Doctora. I have no patience for games." He paced in front of her, his movements predatory. "You stumbled onto something you shouldn't have. Now you're going to tell me everything you know, everything you've seen, everything you've told anyone." The interrogation stretched on for hours. Vargas methodically peeled away at her defenses, probing for weaknesses. Exploiting her vulnerabilities, he knew about her research, about her dedication to the reefs, about her isolation. He used it all against her. He offered no water, no food, just relentless questioning. Finally, she broke, not revealing the full extent of her suspicions, but letting slip enough to satiate his immediate curiosity. She talked about the container, the markings, the strange compass. Vargas listened intently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, a grim smile twisted his lips. "So you figured out what we're shipping, did you?" He gestured to a sealed barrel in the corner of the room. "Agricultural products, as the manifest states, highly potent agricultural products." He opened the barrel, revealing rows of metallic cylinders. Each one was labeled with a biohazard symbol and a complex chemical formula. "This isn't fertilizer, wood doctora," Vargas said, his voice dripping with malice. "This is VX, a neurotoxin. One drop can kill hundreds. We've refined it, enhanced it. This isn't the stuff your grandfather warned you about." Aris felt a wave of nausea wash over her. VX, a nerve agent, one of the deadliest substances known to man. What are you going to do with it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Sabotage," Vargas replied matter-of-factly. "Disrupt, 'cause chaos. We're using the hurricane as cover. Everyone is focused on the storm, on the damage. They won't notice a few accidents here and there. Accidents, power plants, water treatment facilities, bridges, airports. A few strategically placed releases and the entire eastern seaboard will be paralyzed." He spread his hands, a gesture of chilling indifference. "A little disruption, a small price to pay for what we're trying to achieve." She realized the agricultural products weren't being shipped to some unscrupulous buyer. They were being shipped to mainland ports, distributed amongst the chaos of the storm. Time to inflict maximum damage. It wasn't just a smuggling operation. It was an act of terrorism. "You're insane," she breathed, her voice trembling with rage and fear. Vargas chuckled. "Insane, perhaps, but effective, and soon very, very rich." He leaned closer, his eyes boring into hers. "The hurricane is a gift. It washes away evidence, distracts attention, the perfect storm, you might say." He snapped his fingers. "Prepare her." Two of his men stepped forward, their faces grim. Vargas turned his back on her and issued instructions in rapid Spanish. Aris understood enough to know she wasn't going to be released. She was going to be silenced. Vargas returned holding a pistol in his hand. He checked the magazine, the click of the mechanism echoing in the confined space. Any last words? Doctora, he asked, his voice cold and devoid of pity. Aris closed her eyes, bracing for the end. She thought of the bleached coral, of the fragile ecosystem she dedicated her life to protecting. She thought of Ben waiting for her at the station. She regretted not calling the Coast Guard when she had the chance. "It is over," she managed to say, her voice surprisingly steady. Vargas raised the pistol, aiming for her head. "Adios, doctora," as he squeezed the trigger. The radio on the wall crackled to life, shattering the silence. A frantic voice, speaking in heavily accented Spanish, cut through the air. "Javier, tenemos un problema financiero. We have a problem." Vargas froze, his fingers still on the trigger. His eyes darted towards the radio, his expression a mask of fury. He swore under his breath, lowering the pistol slightly. Aris remained motionless, her heart pounding in her chest, suspended between life and death, waiting to see what the interruption meant. The chaos had just begun. The curt Spanish transmission had ripped through the tense silence like a gunshot. Vargas cursed, his focus instantly shifting from Aris to the radio. He barked orders at his men, his composure momentarily fractured. "Secure the perimeter, find out what is happening." Before he could regain control, the facility erupted in chaos. A barrage of gunfire shattered the corrugated metal roof, sending shards of debris raining down. Men screamed, diving for cover. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood. Reyes. Dia, it clicked into place. Someone had been tracking them. Aris, still bound, was knocked to the ground as a firefight exploded around her. Bullets ricocheted off the concrete walls, kicking up dust and debris. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the worst. But the worst didn't come. Instead, a figure in tactical gear, helmeted and armed to the teeth, landed beside her, returning fire with ruthless efficiency. Agent Reyes, a woman, surprisingly, with a steely gaze and a no-nonsense air. "You all right?" Reyes yelled over the din, expertly suppressing a wave of approaching cartel members. "Tied up?" Aris shouted back, her voice strained. Reyes quickly unzipped her restraints, then dragged her to her feet. "Stay low, we've got a hot LZ." The raid was swift and brutal. Reyes' team, a highly trained unit of federal agents, moved with coordinated precision, systematically clearing the facility. The cartel members, caught off guard, put up a fierce resistance, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Aris, still shaken, found herself swept along with the advance, clinging to Reyes for protection. She provided what intel she could, pointing out the location of the communication equipment, the storage rooms, the barrels of VX. "They're targeting infrastructure," she told Reyes, her voice breathless. "Power plants, water treatment facilities. They were planning to release the toxin during the storm." Reyes nodded grimly. "We suspected as much. Thanks to you, we might be able to prevent it." The firefight raged for another 10 minutes before the last of the cartel members were subdued or killed. The facility was a mess, riddled with bullet holes and smeared with blood. The stench of death hung heavy in the air, but Vargas was gone. "He slipped out during the initial chaos," Reyes said, frustration evident in her voice. "We're tracking his signal, but he is good. And the storm is helping him disappear." "He took something," Aris said, remembering the small cylindrical component Vargas had been meticulously handling earlier. Something he'd mentioned was crucial for dispersal. "A stabilizer, I think he called it, for the VX." Reyes' jaw tightened. "Damn it, that is bad. Without it, the toxin is less effective, but it is still lethal." A search of the facility revealed a second hidden compartment, concealed beneath the concrete floor. Inside, they found another shipping container, identical to the one that had washed ashore. It was empty, but the lingering chemical residue confirmed it had recently contained VX. "They've already moved a significant amount of the toxin," Reyes said, surveying the scene. "And Vargas has enough to do serious damage." They managed to contact the Coast Guard, alerting them to the impending threat and the locations of the suspected targets. The search for Vargas intensified, but the hurricane and the sprawling network of waterways made it nearly impossible to track him. As the cleanup operation got underway, Reyes led Aris to a secure area of the facility, offering her medical attention and a much-needed debriefing. "You did good, Thorne," Reyes said, handing her a cup of hot coffee. "You saved a lot of lives today." "I wish we'd caught Vargas," Aris replied, her voice laced with regret. "We will, trust me." "He won't get far." Reyes paused, her expression turning serious. "I've been following this operation for months. The Sombra Negra has been quiet for a long time. This resurgence, it is deeply concerning." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "And there is something else, something I haven't told anyone yet." She hesitated, as if struggling with a difficult confession. "Your brother Daniel Thorne, he was investigating Sombra Negra too, before he disappeared." Aris's breath hitched. Daniel, her brother, missing for 5 years, presumed dead. The wound of his loss had never fully healed. What do you know?" She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Reyes sighed. "He was undercover trying to infiltrate the cartel. He got too close. They found out. The official report said he drowned during a smuggling operation. But I always suspected there was more to it. I think he uncovered something they didn't want getting out." She met Aris's gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "I believe his disappearance is connected to this, to Vargas, and I intend to find out the truth." The revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Daniel investigating Sombra Negra, betrayed. Reyes's words chipped away at the fragile peace Aris had clung to for 5 years, replacing grief with a burning fury. "He was tracking their money laundering operations," Reyes explained, unfolding a map of the keys dotted with highlighted properties. "Shell Corporation's front businesses. They were funneling millions through here, using the islands as a tax haven." "And he got too close?" Aris asked, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "They silenced him, made it look like an accident. But he was getting close to uncovering a network of corruption, reaching high up." Reyes' gaze met Aris's, her expression grim. "I believe someone within the DA helped them cover it up." The thought was staggering. The agency she now trusted. The person who had just rescued her, possibly working alongside those who had orchestrated her brother's death. "We traced Vargas's signal to a private airstrip on Little Torch Key," Reyes continued, pulling up a satellite image. "He is prepping a plane to leave. He still has a significant amount of the stabilizer. We're moving in now." The raid on the airstrip was swift and decisive. Vargas, cornered and desperate, put up a fight, but Reyes' team was prepared. A tense standoff ensued, punctuated by the crackle of gunfire and the roar of engines. Aris, staying back with the support team, watched as Reyes expertly disarmed Vargas, bringing him down with a decisive takedown maneuver. The remaining toxin, fun enough to contaminate a major city's water supply, was secured. Vargas, bruised and defeated, was taken into custody. A wave of relief washed over Aris, mingled with a bitter sense of satisfaction. Justice finally for Daniel. But the closure felt incomplete. She needed to know what truly happened to her brother. "I want to see the wreck," she told Reyes, her voice firm. "His boat, I need to know." Reyes didn't hesitate. A Coast Guard cutter was dispatched, equipped with sonar and diving gear. Aris, armed with Daniel's old navigational charts and her own intimate knowledge of the local currents and reefs, guided the team to a remote section of the Atlantic. A graveyard of forgotten wrecks and treacherous underwater terrain. "I remember him talking about this spot," she said, pointing to a specific coordinates on the chart. "A submerged reef, a strong undertow. He was tracking a suspicious vessel. A yacht registered to one of the shell corporations Reyes mentioned." The sonar pinged, revealing a ghostly outline on the screen. A sunken vessel partially buried in the sand. It was Daniel's boat, the Wanderer. The dive was harrowing. The visibility was poor, the current strong. But as she descended, she recognized the distinctive hull of her brother's boat, now encrusted with coral and teeming with marine life. It was a hauntingly beautiful, tragic monument to his life. Inside the wreck, amidst the decaying wreckage, she found his waterproof logbook. The pages were waterlogged and fragile, but the faded ink was still legible. She carefully extracted the logbook, her hands trembling. The final entries were disturbing. Daniel wrote about escalating pressure from his superiors to close the case. Despite mounting evidence of corruption, he'd uncovered a connection between a high-ranking DA official, third agent Mark Olson Tervente, and the Sombra Negra cartel. He suspected Olson was feeding them information, protecting their operations. A chill ran down her spine. Olsen, Reyes's direct supervisor, the man who had orchestrated the search for Daniel, the man who had declared his death an accidental drowning. She surfaced quickly, delivering the logbook to Reyes. The agent's face paled as she read the damning evidence. "Olsen," she whispered, her voice laced with disbelief. I can't believe it." The pieces clicked into place. The inexplicable delays, the dead ends, the dismissed leads. It all made sense now. Olsen hadn't been trying to find Daniel. He'd been covering up his murder. Reyes immediately ordered Olsen's arrest. The investigation that followed exposed a deep-rooted network of corruption within the DIA, a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the agency. The truth, Aris realized, was far more complex and devastating than she could have imagined. Her brother hadn't simply been caught in the crossfire. He'd been deliberately sacrificed to protect a criminal empire. Standing on the deck of the cutter, watching as Olsen was escorted away in handcuffs, Aris felt a flicker of closure. It wouldn't bring Daniel back, but it brought a measure of justice. Reyes approached her, her expression somber. "I'm so sorry, Aris," she said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I should have seen it. I should have trusted my instincts." Aris shook her head, offering a small, weary smile. "You did what you could, and you saved a lot of lives today." But as she looked into Reyes' eyes, she noticed a subtle flicker, a barely perceptible hesitation, a haunted look that sent a shiver down her spine. Something wasn't right. Reyes had been remarkably quick to act, too eager to shift the blame, too willing to portray Olsen as the sole villain. A sudden realization washed over her, cold and terrifying. The speed and efficiency of the raid, the preemptive intel, the convenient recovery of the toxin. It was all too perfect, too orchestrated. She remembered Reyes's earlier comment about tracking Vargas for months. Months, how the official investigation had barely begun before Vargas was apprehended. Aris's gaze locked with Reyes's, and in that moment she understood. Reyes hadn't simply been investigating Sombra Negra. She'd been forerunning Ayatitizapuaning. The entire operation, the raid, the capture of Vargas, it had all been a carefully crafted deception, designed to cover her tracks and eliminate anyone who posed a threat. The person who had seemingly rescued her, who had promised justice for her brother, was the one who was ultimately responsible for his death. And now she was trapped alone, surrounded by enemies, realizing she'd been a pawn in a much larger, more sinister game.